Okay, so the first thing we're going to do to create our Dreamcatcher is do the actual weave of the Dreamcatcher itself. It's going to be done in gum paste, so it needs to dry overnight. Have a printout of the actual size that you want the Dreamcatcher to be, and make sure that you have it sized so that a round cutter is going to fit just to the tips of your Dreamcatcher points here, because you are going to want the outside hoop to be able to fit over and attach to these points. So just size that so that your round cutter fits just inside of where your hoop will be. So we're going to cut this out and tape it down to a piece of cardboard, and then we're going to tape a piece of wax paper over the top of that. Now we want to put a very thin layer of shortening onto the wax paper. This is going to help our gum paste release easily without breaking our thin strands. Now I have a piece of gum paste that I've modeled with a few different colors. You can use white, you can use any color you want. You're going to want to put that into your extruder. You don't need a whole lot. In my extruder I have a small hole. You don't want a really thick string, and you don't want it too thin either, because it'll just break too easily once it's dried. I'm gonna go ahead and lay it onto a little bit of cornstarch because it'll be very sticky and it's gonna want to stick to itself. So I'm just gonna get a very light dusting of cornstarch onto my bench and extrude my string into that. You don't want to extrude too much at once because this is going to dry pretty quick, of course, because it's gum paste, and we don't want it to dry out before we can work with it. Just give it a very light dusting of cornstarch over the whole thing. Start matching it up to the lines on our Dreamcatcher. You can press it down a little bit and it will adhere with that shortening that we put on there and kind of stick it in place onto the design. Pinch your ends together and then you can flatten them out a little bit. Now we're going to just work our way all the way around, and overlapping we're going to press it down in those spots slightly so it sticks, and touch it with a little bit of gum glue on the overlaps. Okay, so that's it for the string part of the Dreamcatcher. Go ahead and let this dry overnight so that your gum paste is nice and cured, and then we will attach it to our hoop. The next thing we're going to do is make our hoop. Now we are going to make the leather-like strap that is going to wrap around the metal hoop for the Dreamcatcher, and we're going to use wafer paper. Now I have gone ahead and printed it on my edible image printer with kind of a very light tan textured pattern. You can also just hand paint it with either food coloring or airbrush coloring, or dust it with some petal dust as well to get kind of a light tan coloring on it. You only have to do one side because we are going to double this up. We're going to fold it in half and glue it together so we have color on both sides and we have a thicker piece of wafer paper. So I'm going to go ahead and fold it in half. And then I'm going to spray it with paper potion, and that's going to kind of soften the paper and help us glue the two sheets together. Don't want too much, but you do want enough to kind of lightly saturate the paper. Let it sit for about 30 seconds or so and absorb into the paper. It's going to curl up a little bit, but that's okay. Fold it over and just press it together so that it adheres together and sticks nicely. And now we are going to apply some Flex Ink to the wafer paper, and this is once it dries, it's going to give us a really nice sturdy, flexible strip that we can wrap around the hoop to make it look like a leather or a suede wrapped hoop. So I'm just brushing a thin layer of Flexique right onto my wafer paper. Flexique is a product that is versatile. It works really well on wafer paper to make a very fabric-like, flexible product to use in lots of different ways. I'm gonna let that sit for a minute and kind of cool. I'm testing it now just to make sure that it's not still liquid and wet on the surface. It's not. It has absorbed into the wafer paper, but it is still sticky. So if you touched it together, it would definitely stick together. So to keep it from doing that, I'm just gonna very, very lightly brush it with some cornstarch. And you definitely want to do this before you flip it over and treat the other side with Flexique, because it would stick to whatever surface you flipped it over onto. So now it is no longer sticky. I'm gonna flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. Again, let this absorb for a minute or so, and then you'll dust this side with the cornstarch as well. Okay, so now we have a very soft and flexible medium for wrapping our hoop in. So now we are going to make our hoop for the Dreamcatcher, and I'm using aluminum armature wire. This is probably, I think, about a 12 gauge, maybe a 10 gauge. I want it to be pretty thick. If you only have thin armature wire, you could double it up. So what I'm going to do is kind of estimate how much I need to go around my cookie cutter with a little bit extra. Cut off a piece. And then with a pair of pliers, I'm just going to bend about a 90-degree on one end. Now I'm going to take and start wrapping it around my cookie cutter as snugly as I can, bringing it around to meet there. I'm just making sure that I'm pretty much even and snug all the way around the cookie cutter, so we've got a nice even circle. And then I'm going to take my overlap and twist it around. Just twist those two together. You can cut off the excess. Now just kind of play with your hoop and make sure that you've got it nice and round. I also put it on my workbench and just make sure that I've got it pretty flat as well. And then I also like to bring over my Dreamcatcher and hold it up and just make sure that all of my points are still going to extend past the hoop so that we can attach it. Now I am going to attach it to a skewer that is going to be what goes into the cake, and I'm going to use some aluminum foil tape to do that. So I'm going to just use a 6-inch long skewer. You can use a round skewer or a flat skewer or a piece of dowel, whatever you have on hand that works. And keep in mind, this is going to be hidden behind the feathers and fringe, so it doesn't have to be beautiful. It's also going to be wrapped in our suede Flexique wafer paper. Okay. Now that we have that snugly attached, just make sure that it's lined up so that when you stick it in the cake, it's going to be perpendicular. Now we're going to take our edible suede, and you can either cut strips with scissors, or what I like to do is use a rotary cutter. I find it is easier to use than scissors. I'm gonna make my strips probably about a 1/4 inch or so wide. So we're gonna save the rest of this to make some fringe. I find that for attaching the Flexique paper, using the Flexique as glue is the most successful. I don't think that edible glue, Tylose glue, any of that has worked very well for me. So go ahead and heat up some more Flexique and we'll use that as glue. Cutting off the ends, so these little spots that aren't printed. And then adding a dab of Chic. I'm going to start down here on the stick and just start wrapping at an angle. Once I get to the hoop, I'm going to start wrapping around the hoop. You're overlapping slightly as you go. When you get close to the end, you'll add a little Chic to the back. And then continue wrapping. This is where we'll splice in a new piece. Okay, and when you get to the end, just glue your end, and then you're done with wrapping your hoop, and now we'll decorate it. Okay, now we are going to work on our feathers. So these are edible images printed onto wafer paper. When you find the feather that you would like to use, what you're going to need to do is make sure that you print a reverse image of that feather. So what we're going to do is have a front and a back to a feather, so it sandwiches together with the wire in between. So you want a mirror image printed of each side. The way you can do that is just to flip the image horizontally. Copy it and then flip the copy horizontally and get as many as you can onto one sheet. These can either be hand cut out. I like to cut them on my Silhouette Cameo. I find that it's super quick and easy, and they come out really nicely detailed on the edges. So print as many feathers as you need and make sure that you have mirror images of them. And then we're going to use a fabric covered floral wire. I like the fabric covered just because they have a nice texture to them, and they're a little bit softer of a wire, I guess. They're not as stiff for how thick they are, and so that you get a nice quill look without having a very hard to bend wire like an 18 gauge would be. We're also going to use paper potion to glue these two together. These, you can get your paper potion from Icing Images. This technique is really great for doing realistic feathers. So for something like this, I've taken an actual photograph of a feather and printed them, of course printing my reverse images, and cutting them with my Silhouette Cameo and detailing them like I'm going to show you now. But this is a really great technique for making realistic feathers, as well as leaves. Finding photographs of leaves and printing them onto the wafer paper is a really great way to get very realistic looking leaves. Here's some ferns that I did. So it's a pretty cool technique that's pretty versatile. You can do wings for fairies and butterflies. It's a pretty neat technique. So this particular technique can be used for lots of different things. So start by flipping over your wafer paper images, and then we're going to spritz them with just a really fine mist of the paper potion. Here's our paper potion. So just a fine mist, just so it lightly saturates the wafer paper, and we're going to let it sit for just a minute and let it absorb that moisture and become slightly soft. Now we're going to take a piece of our floral wire, cut a length of our floral wire. We're going to lay it down the center of the feather, and you want to make sure that this is kind of lining up where your quill is in the feather. Sometimes a feather will be bent a little bit, or a little bit, the quill won't be perfectly straight down the center. So just watch how your printing is and make sure that your wire matches up with what is printed. Now we're going to take and start with the tip of our feather and just start matching your front piece to your back piece and pressing down on the edges. This is going to glue them together. And then come through and press up against the quill. At this point, I usually just take the quill, the printed part of the quill off. It's not necessary. The wire becomes your quill extended out the end. Now you're going to gently pick this up. And then just press together with your fingers and kind of defining that quill line a little bit as you go. And now I'm going to take a pair of small scissors and I'm just going to come in and kind of snip a little bit in from the edges, giving that kind of cut feather look on the end, on the edges here. Come all the way up. If you're hand cutting out these feathers and you have kind of just a straight line, you can also come in and cut out little bits of triangle bits here and there just to kind of give it that realistic feather look, that tattered, kind of on the edges tattered look that some feathers have. Okay, now I like to take a hard foam mat and a ball tool, and I'm just gonna shape this feather a little bit. I'm gonna come along the quill here and press in slightly and just define that quill a little bit. And then also on the edges, if you gently press down, this is gonna stretch this wafer paper a little bit, so you get a little bit of that cupped look that a feather has. You will have a front and a back, so you can kind of cup the feather like this, like these edges coming up here, and you can do it with your fingers as well. But I do find that using the ball tool, it kind of just stretches that wafer paper out nicely, so it gives it that really realistic feather cupped shape, like that. And then we just let that dry. Okay, so those are the feathers for our Dreamcatcher. Now we're gonna make a few pretty little beads to put onto the feather quill as decorations. I've just modeled a piece of gum paste with a few different colors. You can match your color palette or do some contrasting colors. I'm just going to roll a few small little pieces of gum paste in different sizes and shapes and poke holes in them and thread them onto my feathers. Do some that are larger and some oval beads, some round beads. Get creative. Okay, now we are going to make the fringe that's going to go on our Dreamcatcher. So we're going to make some more of our Flexique wafer paper. This time we're going to color our Flexique so our fringe has some matching colors. Okay, once this has solidified, we're going to go ahead and dust this side as well with the cornstarch. Okay, now we have this very beautiful fabric-like edible product here that we are going to make our fringe out of. I'm only going to cut up to about halfway into the paper. I'm going to do it about a little bit less than the width of my Dreamcatcher, so that looks good. I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. Again, not quite cutting to the center, so we have a strip in the center that is solid. Okay, so we do want these to have a little bit of a V shape, so we're just going to cut off the corners here like this. Just eyeball it like that. The brush, I'm just going to paint some warm Flexique right onto the inside of the hoop there. And drape my fringe right into it. Get it in place quickly because it is going to be solidifying very quickly. Just press it in place. Okay, now we are ready to attach our Dreamcatcher pattern. We're going to very gently loosen the gum paste from the wax paper with a little offset spatula. Just slide it underneath and gently loosen from the wax paper. It's just glued down with the shortening, so it should come off fairly easy. Be gentle with it at this point, it's very delicate. Okay, now we are going to attach our Dreamcatcher pattern to the hoop. So I'm taking a small piece of our colored gum paste, and I'm just going to mix that in with a little bit of gum glue to make it more like a soft paste. And that's going to be our glue to hold our gum paste pattern onto the hoop. It's very sticky. It's kind of marshmallow-like. So we're just going to put a little bit of that on each point and then press it onto the hoop and let it dry. Now we're going to position our hoop right over it. Lift it up and press it in place. Making sure that our points are lined up with the stick so it's very perpendicular. Pressing gently but firmly because we don't want to snap our gum paste. And if you have any little bits of the gum paste that squished out, go ahead and remove that. And if you have any bits of the point sticking out beyond your hoop, you can trim that off as well. I'll let this dry for a few hours so that it's nice and sturdy. Okay, so to attach our feathers to our Dreamcatcher, we're going to make a loop with our floral wire. The middle one is a little tricky. We want it pretty high up on the Dreamcatcher, so we want to have the top bead be in front of the hoop here, which means that our loop needs to be pretty large. Just measure it like that, and then you can cut off the excess and bring your loop around, and we're going to squeeze it on there so it stays. And keep trimming if you need to. This part is a little tricky. Okay, so there's our middle. First I bend it forward slightly, and then I bring it into a loop, leaving it slightly open. Hook over, and then squeeze your loop. That's it. Now we're ready to put our topper on our cake.